This is Justin Lum, investigative reporter with Fox 10 News. We are talking all about the Lori Vallow Chad Daybell case. As many know, Lori Vallow will be sentenced in just a matter of days as she was convicted for murdering her two children recently, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan, also convicted of conspiring in the murder of Tammy Daybell, the first wife of Lori Vallow's now husband, Chad Daybell, and also a defendant in this case. This is definitely a long timeline of events that have led up to this point, and I'm joined by Taylor Larsen. He is the former lawyer for Charles Vallow. Another name we'll introduce here, that is Lori Vallow's fourth husband, who was shot and killed in July of 2019. She is facing a murder charge for that case here in Maricopa County, conspiracy to commit murder. It's all a long story, right, Taylor? And you take us through the beginnings of that, through the divorce papers that you penned and filed back in what, February 2019, I believe. It seems like so long ago.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, January, February 2019, over almost 4.5 months or 4.5 years ago now. Yeah.
And clearly, you have been in talks with Charles Vallow before actually filing those documents. So you really got the backstory and knew about the troubles he was dealing with. He was basically um, telling police, we see it on body cam, telling police in Gilbert that something was going on with his wife, Lori Vallow, at the time, that she was threatening him, threatening to kill him, and believe that she was a god. I mean, I've asked you this before, but just for people who don't really know this part of the story, just how you put something like that together in court and who was supposed to believe something like that. You've covered a lot of cases.
Yeah, it was an extremely unique set of facts given to us by, Charles. Not often that someone comes in and says, "Hey, I want to get a divorce," and it's because my wife thinks she's a goddess and she can't die and that she's trying to murder me. And, the deeper we kind of dug into that, because on its face, when someone comes in and says that, it's just not really believable. And so in order to go to the courts and play in that arena, you need tangible proof of these things. And a lot of these allegations, it's kind of hard to prove. But Charles was adamant that he had proof. Charles was adamant that what he was saying was fact, and he was just looking for someone who would listen to his story and help him and help JJ, and secure their safety and, do what he needed to do. Because Charles didn't want really to get a divorce from Lori. It was kind of a last resort at that time. But it was because he started to fear really for his safety and for JJ's safety. And that's what kind of led him into our office. And, after our initial meeting, I'm like, "Charles, you got to get us some more proof so that we can include this in the documents and alert the judge to these things." And he started giving us emails and stuff. A lot of stuff has come out in the public, obviously through the trial now, but also with your reporting and others reporting. It's kind of all come out and played out in the public, and it's been very interesting and surreal to see something be played out in the public that I kind of knew privately was happening. And to see it now, here we are, like we said, 4.5 years later. It's just kind of been a wild thing. But everything that he has said to us was validated through now, even through the trial. And I think that was very important. And it shows that Charles wasn't out to destroy Lori. He wasn't out to be vindictive or make up a bunch of lies. He was just trying to be heard and to get safety for himself and for JJ.
Why do you think Charles wasn't really looked at like a victim in the beginning when you see the body cam footage? And yeah, it seems like unbelievable allegations that he's throwing out there. And clearly he just wanted to get the divorce so he could get full custody of JJ. Ultimately, that didn't pan out. But yeah, why do you think no one really took him seriously?
I think it's just that we kind of have a broken system, and that's, you know, not just specific to here in Phoenix and in Arizona. That's a nationwide and really a global crisis. We have mental health crisis on our hands. And so when you are dealing with individuals who have mental health issues or suffering mentally from distress, a lot of times, you know, first responders, whether that's the police or whether that's attorneys, we get, you know, we get a lot of these crazy allegations and we become somewhat callous to it. It's almost like it's not as crazy because we kind of hear crazy allegations every once in a while, you know, and those will turn up to be lies. You know, people, especially in my line of work, when we're going through a divorce or especially with children, people make stuff up all the time to try to get an advantage in court, to try to get custody. And unfortunately that has led to some calloused you know, ways. And I try to, in my practice, I try to keep that in, you know, in my mind. And especially now through this case with Charles, you know, and the fact that these things were then vindicated, you know, and validated, it helps me going forward that, you know, I try to take everything serious. But I just think that you know, when you have a lot of these issues, people become a callous to it, and it's hard to believe a lot of the times.
So Charles's case has changed you as a lawyer in many ways,
Absolutely.
and how you look at things and how you listen to people. Because this was maybe one of the more unique times where, like, I know I want to listen to this guy, I want to believe him, but like, how do I believe this? That had to be the challenge at first, right? And there were some facts he laid on the table with the bank accounts being drained of $35,000 by Lori. Um, and I'm sure he had, you know, messages and things like that, just kind of this contentious battle going on. But how do you prove that someone believes that they have powers and that, you know, the end of the world is coming, all of that, to actually get things to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has changed the way I view people when they come in, you know. And like you said, it's more like the bank account stuff, that's easily provable, right? You just get a
Yeah.
bank statement, you show it, that's easy. uh but some of these other allegations, like you know, being that she lived 9 times, this 9 probations or whatever her and Chad term it, and that she's, you know, a god and she's commissioned by Jesus Christ to lead, you know, the 144,000 or whatever. That stuff's kind of hard to prove. You know, so it was through, you know, emails and stuff that's kind of played out through the courts that came around. But it's it's just it's just amazing. It's amazing that all was real and true. Like there's no other real word for it.
Yeah. And all that, I mean, here we are. What's your reaction to sentencing day? How, I know you said surreal, but how much have you still been following, and what do you expect to see from Lori in the courtroom once again?
Yeah, you know, I followed the case pretty closely. Uh as at least really at the beginning and then kind of at the end through the trial. And I, you know, I've listened to some of what family members have said, you know, Lori's family members, and kind of how she is still viewing this all through a distorted reality. Like you know, does she still really believe Chad? And for everything that we've kind of heard, you know, it seems like she does. And so on Monday, when, you know, when the sentence is laid down, I really think that we won't get much of a different reaction than what we got when the verdict was read. You know, I think she is still living in she's not living in real life. I think, you know, she's either it's through mental distress or, you know, brainwashing or all the other different theories that are out there on kind of what she's gone through, and no one really knows except for her maybe. But I don't anticipate any other reaction than just kind of like the cold uh you know, non-reaction that we got when the verdict was read.
Would you be interested in hearing her say anything, or you as someone that supports this family and especially a victim like Charles in his case in Arizona, do you just want to see justice and a sentence? She faces a life sentence without parole. That's what she's facing in the max. Is that what you're more focused on, or because I know that there are people who do wonder, will she say something?
Yeah, I do. It would be nice to kind of hear her thoughts. We didn't really get that when she didn't testify during the trial, which wasn't surprising. I know a lot of people were kind of surprised by that, but as an attorney, I completely understand why she didn't take the stand. And I didn't anticipate her to take the stand. I thought it would be more, more shocking if she did take the stand in her defense. Um, but it would be, part of that justice is there will never be enough justice. There's so many people that are now dead because of, her and Chad's actions. And there are so many other lives affected because of that, that there really is no way to achieve justice. We can only take what the court system can give to her. And so I think, in my opinion, it would be a little more if she would accept some responsibility, because she clearly hasn't. And I think she doesn't think that this is all real, or that she's guilty at all. I think she really thinks that she's done what she was supposed to do, that was the way it was supposed to happen, and that she, freed these individuals, their spirits, I guess, from being, or their bodies from being zombified, or whatever their terms are.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, right? I mean, in the end, you have two innocent children that were murdered, and then you have an innocent woman, like mother and grandmother, that was also killed. And I've had to train myself to, instead of saying, "Well, investigators believe Lori used religious beliefs to justify this." Now she's convicted and saying she used her religious beliefs regarding the end of the world to justify killing her children and plotting this plan to make sure that Tammy Daybell died. That is now on the record, and it is surreal, and she will be, sentenced on Monday. But Charles is still waiting um, for his justice. His case is still waiting here in Maricopa County, and I'm sure for you, as being his former lawyer, you'd like to see that extradition happen and see um, justice there, because you had a relationship with him. And I know that when the shooting happened, when he was shot and killed by Alex Cox, who's not here to, say anything, he was the shooter. That's gonna be even more surreal for you, I bet.
Yeah, when the charges were finally, made public, that she was going to be charged with Charles, conspiracy to commit Charles's murder, that it was found that it wasn't self-defense, you know, I was happy about that. There's no other way around it. Like, Charles deserves the justice, but I think that in doing it the way that it's kind of playing out now, with the stuff being done in Idaho first, and her being convicted in Idaho first for these murders, and now being sentenced in Idaho, then, being extradited down here to Arizona. I honestly would, it's my opinion, and I only knew Charles for a very small portion of time, but I think that he would almost like that the kids went first, that they were given, the little bit of justice that they could get, and that, hopefully she gets the maximum of what she's facing, which is, like you said, life without parole. And then, we turn the focus onto Charles and give him the, what he needs here in Arizona, especially his loved ones, his family and friends that have suffered, through the four years since he's been gone now. and we can turn the focus on seeking that little bit of justice that we can here in this life for her. And I think that I would hope that Chad would almost be charged with conspiracy too, because as it played out through Lori's trial, I think he was in step with Lori and Alex on getting rid of Charles. He was constantly, Lori and him were constantly communicating about when Charles was going to leave the earth, and they thought he was going to die in a car accident or whatever. And so to me, that's another part that hasn't dropped yet that I'm looking forward to, and I hope that the prosecutor's office will bring that forth, and maybe that will happen as we get closer to Chad's trial next year or afterwards, or even after what happens with Lori here after she's extradited.
Yeah, I think Charles's story, I always go back to it, and I always say that this is an Arizona story that ended it in Idaho. It's not about like, taking or making a state look like it had more impact, but in reality, this is where it starts. That's just the reality. The story starts here in Arizona, actually in Gilbert, Arizona, with sounding the alarm by Charles. And I think it's interesting, and yet it's so sad because he really predicted everything. Like he really literally predicted that he might die, or he did say that to you.
Yep.
And he even told you who would be responsible or implicated. I mean, that doesn't happen a lot. And you just think like, wow, if anybody else could have helped him a bit more, just kind of intervene some way. I mean, maybe what if?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big what if, and I think about that anytime we talk about this case or it comes up in the news, the what ifs. And, I think it's been talked about a lot, even and in through the trial. The prosecution said it best in their opening and closing argument. This case was about money, sex, and power, nothing else. And you think about it, you have Kay and Larry, who are loving grandparents who would have loved nothing more than to just take JJ and go live in Louisiana, with him and take care of him and let Lori go and do whatever mission she thinks she's called of God to do, and he didn't have to die for that. You think of Charles and JJ when we filed for divorce. Charles just wanted to take JJ and go be away, from Lori and let her go do her thing. It's the same type of thing. But so you have to ask yourself, what's the motive there? What's the reasoning for not letting that? Here you have Kay and Larry told Lori they would take. She knew that. Lori knew that. And Charles was telling Lori, all the time that just let me and JJ go, and you can go do your thing. We're not going to be a hindrance. So the only answer that I've come to is that they both had money on their heads, right? Through
Mhm.
Charles with the life insurance policy, $1 million, which I am 100% grateful that Lori didn't get a piece of that. And JJ, that was one thing that she was convicted with, was the Social Security, money that JJ was getting every month. She needed that money too. And so that was the reason why she needed to not just cast them by the wayside. It was entirely about money. There's no other reason. And, Charles and JJ would still be here with us today if it wasn't for the price on their head, basically.
Yeah, you remember when Charles was telling you he needed to figure out the whole life insurance deal and change the beneficiary to Kay because from what we learned, uh, Lori had tried to get into the account, right?
Yeah. That was the first, I think, major misstep in Chad and Lori's plan, was trying to access Charles's life insurance account and information, and claiming that they were Charles. We don't know who called, but that triggered something with Charles, because then he immediately called me and was like, hey, someone's trying to do some fraud on my life insurance account. And I had that conversation with him, like, how much money are we talking about? Who's the beneficiary? And that's when we had that discussion, and I told him, I said, look, if you're really thinking that you are, you're going to be murdered by Alex, because that's what Lori wants, then you need to change that beneficiary and make sure that Lori doesn't get that money. And so that was when he immediately jumped into action, and we know the rest. He changed the beneficiary to Kay. He told me that the reason why he wanted Kay to be the beneficiary was because he wanted that money to take care of JJ and his special needs, and he knew that JJ's special needs required, some financial means for that, to get him the best care that he needed and that he deserved. And he thought, if Lori takes me out and I'm not here to protect and provide for JJ, then the next person in line is going to be Kay. And so, I don't think that Charles would have thought in a million years that Lori would do anything to harm JJ or Tylee for that matter. He always claimed that Lori was a great mom and that she was a very loving individual. And, he didn't want to take JJ from her, but it was more, she just didn't want anything to do with him.
Yeah, it's wild to think about that. And Kay is JJ's grandma. I have to stick that in there for people who are, I mean, most people know, you see Kay's face and she's been big part of this media coverage and advocating for not just JJ but all the victims through this entire case. But yes, that beneficiary change, you basically advised him to make that move.
100%.
That's a huge move right there. And it was an alarm.
Yeah, I mean, and typically in divorce, when we're talking about life insurance policies, we'll advise our clients to change it, usually towards the end or after the divorce is finalized. But when there's any implication of, violence that's escalating, or, in this scenario, we have a client telling us that, he thinks his safety, he's fearing for his safety, for his life, that his wife's brother is going to kill him, and at the hand of his wife ordering her brother to do so. It was a thing that we needed to jump on and make sure that was changed immediately.
But Charles did not believe that at the time the kids would be in danger.
Right.
He just felt that he could be killed.
Right.
Wow. And then at some point, right, like in March, he, says, I don't want to do it. I don't want to get a divorce anymore. I wonder what that was like for you. I mean, you can't tell someone, like, I really strongly encourage you to get this divorce. That's not your job, right? And
Yeah.
but that had to be, I don't know, describe that.
It was kind of hard to take, but I completely understood the reasoning behind it. Charles really thought that we couldn't find Lori. We didn't know where she was. We couldn't serve her with the court documents, and we were looking for her. And come to find out later, when this is all played out through the public and through the trial, she was in Hawaii with Tylee, visiting her friend. And so we weren't really able to initiate the court case and get it involved until we served her with those documents. And so after about a month or so, the strategy kind of shifted, and it was like, hey, why go through this or initiate this proceedings and follow it through if she's just leaving you alone? Because she wasn't communicating with Charles at all. She had totally ghosted him. And so he's like, well, I'm here. I have what I want, which is JJ, and I'm able to provide the safety that he needs and the care that he needs. So I don't need Lori, and it was more of a, I don't really need to get the divorce right now. Like, if she's not going to participate, then and she's going to leave us alone, then, I'll just keep doing what I got to do and provide for JJ, and we'll go on our merry way. So that was kind of the more of the strategy behind and letting go of the divorce. It was like, why am I going to expend all this money and attorney's fees fighting for something that Lori's already willing to give me, which is JJ. So,
Yeah. But she came back and they reunited? And do you feel like that charm that everyone talks about with her just kicked in?
100%. And, throughout everything, Charles maintained that he loved
Mm,
Lori, and that never that never wavered. His whole thing was, this is a woman that I love, that I've been married to for 14 years. She is a great mother, a great person, and she is my companion. And she's just going through something right now that she needs help. And he was just trying to get the help that she needs, hoping that one day she would snap out of it. He kind of explained it as he's living in a nightmare, and he's hoping that he'll wake up and they'll be back to the loving
yeah.
happy family that they were before all this. And he just thought, she needs to either get some therapy, some medication, or something that could help her deal with whatever she was going through.
And, from what we see in the police reports, he clearly knew that she was having an affair and he was going to tell, or he did notify Tammy. We don't know if Tammy got those messages, but he knew that Chad and Lori were involved. So a lot of stuff going on. Still, he stuck by her in the month of June 2019 and was more just like trying to make it work, but they were also separated, so they weren't really living together. Um, and he still didn't decide to go back forward with the divorce. It just it's a really, now that we can look at it, I know hindsight is 2020. It's just a sad case. Say that. But I like to ask as well, just what are your thoughts about the charges involving, Brandon's case, Brandon Boudreaux? I mean, that's a near miss. Just how complex and how twisted this case is, with multiple people have died or almost been hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Going through it with Charles, I never knew anything about Brandon or Melanie and all that. I found that out much later, after Charles was murdered, and after Tammy was murdered, and the kids, now that we know that they were murdered sometime in September. And then I heard about Brandon's being shot at later, and I thought, I, I don't know how much, how much does this grow out? Like, it it it's amazing to me. There's like this web of people that are all connected, and it seems like there's a common denominator. Like, there's family members of Lori all being led kind of by Chad. But you know knowing there was a near miss, and who knows who else was on whatever list. And I think it really centered around who had life insurance money. I I circle back to that, because I think the prosecution made it very clear when they're opening and closing arguments and throughout the trial, that that was kind of at the center. It's what fueled some of this conspiracy to do these things. And so, luckily, it it didn't get bigger than this. I mean, this is huge, and it's a massive tragedy. But how many other people were kind of next in line, I guess.
Yeah, I think the one thing with this case is there was such a paper trail. Um, there was a paper trail across different jurisdictions, and I mean to include the divorce papers you filed. Like, if those don't exist, I mean, I don't know if the media coverage would have been as rampant. I think with the stories that were coming out of these documents, that's what kept it going, because the kids were still missing at the time, and Lori and Chad were nowhere to be found. They were just persons of interest. But these papers, it was like showing that Charles was speaking from the grave, making these allegations about Lori, and they were court documents. They weren't just text messages. Like, if they were only emails and text messages saying she thinks she's a god and she's gonna murder me and she thinks she's gonna leave the 144,000, but there was validity to an actual lawyer representing him and filing it. I think like, I just thinking about that, it really shows how it was a piece in the timeline to help further everything.
100%. I think that, not only did it kind of give the salacious details the media loves to, that make good headlines, that keeps the attention on the case, and I think that was a really big part at the beginning of this, when the kids were still missing, and it put a lot of pressure not only on Lori because she was not cooperating and not saying where the children were, but also a lot of pressure on the law enforcement officials and resources, to keep going, keep digging, and like you said, it really was kind of eerie in a way that Charles was able to speak from the grave and say these things that I think played an integral part at the beginning of keeping the case in the headlines, keeping the awareness on it, and like I said, the different pressures of it. But and it wasn't just like it was an attorney speaking for him. It was his own words. It was through my writing that he was speaking it. As you have a copy of the motion for temporary orders that was verified by him, signed and notarized by him, affirming that everything that was stated was true and accurate to the best of his knowledge. And so it really was his words.
Yeah, and I think at the time it's important to know you were writing at a time where you're just trying to help him as your client. You weren't thinking this is going to make headlines
Yeah,
somewhere. This
not
is
in a
going to be
million
a part of
years.
something. Yeah, that wasn't your intention because, then it just what that means with it in the hands of the media is that something more disturbing could have been happening, and hence here we are, ultimately the tragedy that it is that part is sad too, but I just think that people advocating for each other, I think that's the lesson that we gather out of this, whether you are a journalist or whether you are a lawyer, whether you are law enforcement or a family member, like advocating for someone and then also having that footprint is just one big piece of the puzzle. So looking back on it now, it's pretty wild for me. But Taylor, thank you so much for your time. We've talked about this case for years, and here we are. This is sentencing day for Lori Vallow. Saying that is just, wow, how far this has gone in July 2023.
Yeah, it is crazy that we are finally here. It feels like we can kind of put a bow on that part of the case, but it's just the first chapter, you know.
Mhm.
It's just the
Yeah.
first chapter that we're finally coming to, or maybe, you know, I don't want to use too many author puns involving, a Chad involved in the case, but honestly, it's not, it's more than a chapter. I think it's the first book.